Because this was quite a report.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Mayor and members of council, I'd just like to turn this. Thank you for the opportunity to present the asset management plan for our core municipal assets. So we're going to talk a little bit about the regulatory requirements for asset management and where we are on that process. Talk about some asset management steps. We'll look at a life cycle model of a typical asset. And then we'll talk about our three reports that you have before you today for approval. Is our stormwater, our wastewater, and our roads and bridges, which makes up our core municipal assets. So in 2017, the province passed Ontario Regulation 588. 2019, municipalities in Ontario were required to prepare a strategic asset management policy, which is about 3 years ago, council adopted in Sault Ste. Marie. Fast forward to this year, we're required to have a asset management plan for our core municipal assets, that being and the wastewater, stormwater, and our road infrastructure and bridges. That had to be in place by July 1st, 2022, which you will hopefully endorse tonight. Going forward to 2 years to July 1st, 2024, we'll be required to enhance that to include all other municipal assets, being parks, landfills, sidewalks, other buildings. And in 2025, July 1st, we will need to look at service levels and as a municipality decide what level of service we want these assets to perform and then how we're going to maintain them and how we're going to fund that. So asset management steps. So it's kind of hard to read here. So typical asset management steps in this process are identifying the asset, like what do we own? Looking at what the asset is worth. Determining how critical an asset is. Doing condition assessment. Assessing the risks, like what is the risk of a poorly performing asset as opposed to maybe not having the asset. Determining level of service, what I said, which greatly impacts cost, which is the next one. Determining the cost impact to the city and how are we going to pay for it. So looking at the typical life cycle of a municipal asset at around zero, I'll just hover my cursor here because it helps me. At around year zero, we acquire an asset or construct an asset. And there's a capital cost to that. Moving along, the asset costs the city a little bit more every year. So those costs accumulate till you get somewhere about here, sort of midlife of the asset, maybe a little bit less. And there's a refurbishment or an influx of money to prolong the life of this asset. That would be a good example. That would be like a road resurfacing. So at that point, there's another influx of money and it carries on costing a little bit more every year till we get to this point here where we're looking at the asset's reached the end of its useful life. We're looking at disposal and reconstruction or renewal of the asset. So looking at our three core municipal asset categories, stormwater. So stormwater, that includes our sewers, our service connections, our manholes, our catch basins, basically anything that collects water. That's our stormwater conveyance system. We do have pump stations. There's structural components, electrical components, mechanical and process equipment on pump stations, and other municipal stormwater infrastructure like ponds and snow dumps. We have seawall being on the Great Lakes. So our condition of our stormwater assets it's an age-based condition assessment for this exercise. So we're looking at right now the condition of our stormwater infrastructure is pretty good. It's over 90% of our asset is in good to very good condition, with our overall cost of in today's dollars of our stormwater municipal assets, just over $1 billion. Moving on to wastewater. So we have the components we're looking at we have 2 wastewater treatment plants, one in the east and one in the west. There's process equipment, electrical instrumentation, and all of our weirs and that which comes with the sewage treatment plants. We also have pump stations. I think we have 24 pump stations municipally owned. We have structural process equipment that needs to be maintained within those themselves, and then the conveyance system. That includes our sewers, our lateral connections to commercial and private property, manholes, those types of things. Again, our wastewater system condition summary has been arrived at based on an age-based approach. So we're about 87% of our wastewater infrastructure is in good to very good condition. So again, very, very good. And our wastewater assets in today's dollars total about $1.8 billion. On to our roads and bridges. It's a little different story. So when we're looking at our road system, we have our arterial, collector, local, and rural roads, as well as we have about just under 1,200 lane kilometers of roads maintained in the city. We have bridges. There's 49 bridges, I believe, of pedestrian and vehicular bridges. The condition assessment of these are a little bit different than the wastewater and stormwater. These were actually done by doing new inspections. We've assigned a pavement condition index to every section of road, as well as a bridge condition index to each bridge. So these are actual condition assessments that will be done on a every second year basis. The condition of our roads, a little bit lower than the other infrastructure. We're just over 40% of our roads are in good to very good condition. Just over a third of our roads are seen as fair, and just under a quarter of our lane kilometers would be poor to very poor. Bridges doing very well. Over 80% of our bridges are in very good condition, good to very good condition. The overall replacement cost of the bridges and roads, our transportation network, is around $730 million. So with that, I can take any questions.
Okay, council, we have questions. So Council Christian.
Eight plus an additional 3% for poor condition, as you describe it. Are there any immediate concerns? And if so, what mitigating factors should we be concerned about or think about in the near term, say in the next year or so? Are these issues going to be addressed directly?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Christian, again, the information you're reading is all age-based.
Yeah.
We do have areas in town where we've done condition assessments that we keep an eye on certain areas where we know that there is potential for failure of a sanitary sewer, something like that. But this is for the wastewater and stormwater is strictly age-based. So based on that.
Okay. All right.
So we still keep track of our problem areas in the city in the same way, and Public Works through their maintenance supervisors keep a good inventory of where they need twice annual flushing or extra flushing or added maintenance to make sure these things are operating before we're able to reconstruct them.
So just to be clear, so even if something is regarded as being in a state of very poor condition,
right,
it doesn't necessarily mean that it's critical at this point. It's simply an age issue and something that you're tracking as part of your asset management plan.
I would say on an age-based approach, no, we're not calling that as a dire need to reconstruct it right now, but we do have areas where we keep a very close eye on.
Thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Bruni, then Councilor Bezoil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Carl, for your presentation. Councilor Christian didn't mention the roads, so I'll just speak on the roads. You have 2% that are in very poor condition. Would you agree? I guess. Maybe can you explain how do you get only 2% of all our roads would be in very poor condition?
Very poor is Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, very poor is a very low score. So I would look at poor to very poor. You're just around 20% that are roads that are worthy of reconstruction or resurfacing. So that number does seem a little low when to the person who's driving around town and feeling the bumps in the spring, and they might have a hard time accepting that. But when you're talking about 1,100 plus lane kilometers of road. It's over almost 600 kilometers, centerline kilometers of road. So 20% of that is still quite a number, right? That you're talking about. To do the math in my head, but there's a lot, hundreds of kilometers of roads that are in poor condition.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Carl.
Was that all, Councilor Bruni? Councilor Bezoil.
Thank you. Thanks, Carl, again for the presentation. My question does relate to the roads in terms of when you're looking at asset risk and prioritizing, what other factors go into play? I mean, I know that, you and I have dealt with people that are living on Victoria Avenue that, are asking, when is it going to get fixed, the drive, things like that. So those roads don't have heavy traffic per se. So when you are looking at that asset risk, like what are the other factors that go into determining how do you prioritize, who's going to get the next new set of
Right.
pavement? If you could explain that, please.
Mr. Mayor to Councillor Vezo-Allen. So you're right, like arterial roads serve the greatest number of people. So we tend to spend money on our main arteries and resurfacing sooner than we would a local road that has 200 vehicle trips a day, sort of thing. Another thing that has to be considered is we've presented 3 documents here, all independent of each other, but really it's not really fair to consider them all independent of each other. You have, for these local roads, you may have a 100-year-old sanitary sewer, which is pretty ripe and fails regularly, but the surface isn't too bad. So we have to consider them all together, and that's where it's not as easy as just going to these dashboards on this that come with this plan and picking the next one, highest one on the list. We have to look at everything, because you can't replace a sanitary sewer without replacing the road. So there still is a lot of input from staff and some design thought and to see which and council which roads are going to be the highest priority.
Okay, thanks, Carl. No other questions?
Anybody else? So Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Carl, I know that you put a lot of work into this and excellent information. Just for the viewers at home, so obviously this is very valuable information. And how are you going to use this valuable information? Where are you going to go from here? Where are you going to be coming back to us in 3 months, especially at budgetary time, or 6 months? Where are you going from here with all this valuable information? Where with your team?
Our first opportunity to really use the road information, Mr. Mayor to Councillor Hollingsworth, to use the road information would be when we prioritize our resurfacing program for next year. So we're certainly going to use those PCI index numbers for our roads to bring a report to council for the 2023 resurfacing program. We also have to do a 5-year capital plan next year. We recently approved a 2-year capital plan, so we'll be doing a full 5-year capital plan. We'll be using our storm and sanitary and road numbers to help prioritize those programs.
Okay. Okay, great. So we can.
Councillor Hollingsworth, like the CEO has something to offer.
Oh, sure.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth and the rest of council, just so you're aware, we will be holding a more in-depth presentation from the actual consultants that develop these reports for the next council. It was felt that is something late in this year, once the new council is struck and constituted, we will have a more in-depth presentation. As you will have noted in the reports, there are a lot of implementation factors for each report. Those factors need to be assessed by staff and some sort of coherent plan put together to implement them. So we would look to be bringing that back to the new council prior to next year's budget.
Okay, great. Again, I thought this was valuable information for us, but also for those that are home and listening. And for our next new council, it's going to be a good orientation and a good overview of our challenges. I'll just repeat, Councillor Christian and I, and many of us around this table believe in improving our roads, but we also have to improve the other infrastructure. Thank you again, Carl.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. CAO White may have addressed this question because it may now come up at the next meeting, but through you to Mr. Rumiel, given that there's only 1.5% of our roads constructed as gravel roadways, do we have any plans in the long term or however short term to upgrade those to an asphalt, like a Class C?
Mr. Mayor to Councillor Scott, we'll look at those roads through future capital transportation programs. Yes, there was a report a couple years back on what to do with our Class D roads, and that's still an initiative that we're looking at.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Gardy.
Yeah, I had 2 points. One was kind of along the lines of Councillor Scott. He and I are both hearing about people who live in more rural areas, especially along the water, whose immediate infrastructure, they're under the impression isn't up to snuff. And when you go out there and take a look, you tend to agree with them. My question to you, Carl, and maybe to Mr. White, through you, Mr. Mayor, is, we hear a lot about roads, all of us. And, city staff does a really good job in other facets of the corporation, going out and communicating plans and information to the public. I was wondering if, Councillor, excuse me, Hollingsworth talked about, coming back to us. I was wondering if there's been any thought to be, aside from presenting this in public to us and hopefully picked up through the media, there were any plans for you guys to maybe provide some sort of information by whatever means to the public at large, so they are fully able to appreciate all of the work that you guys do, that you're tasked with doing, and the plan moving forward? Because, you mentioned to us a little while ago, I think I heard $700 million, right? You know what I mean? When it comes, I just think it's important for the public to know all of the work that you guys are doing, and the monumental kind of task that you're tasked with when it comes to all this infrastructure within the community. So I just put that out there as a suggestion, and wondering if you guys had any plans.
Go ahead, Mr. CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, when we get very in-depth and refined information such as this, it becomes part of our overall communication. So I would suggest to you the next main time we would be conveying information like this will be with our budget engagement process with the public.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Thank you, Carl.
So I have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth, resolved that the report of the Manager of Development and Environmental Engineering dated August 29, 2022 concerning asset management plan core assets be received, and that the asset management plan reports be approved. Further, that the reports be referred to staff for review and report back to council regarding implementation and continuous improvement.
All in favor? Carried. That brings us to consent, Madam Clerk.
It does.
Council, any matters on consent? Start with Councilor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Rumiel. Agenda item 7.10. Carl, thanks for that report. Page 2, top paragraph, reads that the data was compared against minimum criteria to warrant all-way stop control at this intersection. And based on the field data collected, none of the minimum criteria were met to warrant an all-way stop control at this intersection. It goes on to say that Public Works and Engineering Services do not recommend any changes to the intersection of at Strand Avenue and Wilson Street. So let me first say that I completely understand the outcome of the report. It doesn't meet the criteria. It's objective. It's an objective look at that intersection. And obviously, if it doesn't meet the criteria and accidents happen, then there's driver error involved. Mr. Mayor, I need to refer to 7-11, if that's okay.
It's fine.
It's the agenda item.
It's fine, Councilor.
And how it ties into this. Mr. Rumiel, the report on active transportation talks about the concept of Vision Zero and how that concept could eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. When we look at intersections, if we were to adopt this policy of the concept of Vision Zero, is engineering at all looking at how this concept could mitigate the issues that we have at intersections like Strand and Wilson, where they don't meet the criteria to make any changes?
I understood what you're asking.
You understand
Are
the
you clear on that, Mr. Romeo?
I think so. Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero. So the report was looked at whether a always stop as opposed to a single stop controlled intersection should be used. So if you took a deeper dive into the OTM, it actually said like putting an always stop for traffic or speed control or speed management is not recommended. It's not a tool to calm drivers. It can actually encourage disobedience in the other direction, can cause other issues. So if we're looking at from a safety standpoint in this intersection, I think that we need to look at an upgrade in the infrastructure, and that being both of these roads are Class B roads, and probably, I mean, while they don't sit in the hierarchy of getting reconstructed this year, resurfaced this year, they should have sidewalk and be to a Class A urban standard. So I don't think that adding an always stop is the answer to enhance safety there, because the guidelines tell us that it isn't.
Just for clarity, I know what the acronym OTM stands for, but could you let the people?
Sorry, Ontario Traffic Manual.
Thank you. Councilor Nero, does that address what you were hoping it would address?
I guess I would comment that, first of all, I don't believe the motion just asked to look at should there be a four-way stop there. I believe the motion says that to look at changes regarding any changes that should be made to the present traffic controls. I guess certainly includes a four-way stop. I'm thinking more in terms of, I know that we're looking under the active transportation master plan, we're looking at and having policy discussions, as that report says, on this Vision Zero. But it seems like maybe we should be looking at these things. We should have been looking at these things anyways, because it just makes sense. What else can be done to mitigate the issues at this intersection besides changing the traffic controls? Yes, that's what I'm asking. Are we doing that at all right now?
Mr. Romeo?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero, this report looked at the changing of traffic control at the intersection, and the logical one would be they always stop. I don't think anybody was considering traffic signals there. So that's the how we looked at it. We did not mention or look at adding of pedestrian facilities or looking at any other kind of traffic calming. We certainly could.
Yeah, and again, I don't mean to be critical of this report. I get it. I expected that answer in this report because that's what we use. We use objective reports. We check boxes. If it meets criteria, it gets changed. If it doesn't, it remains the way it is. Well, I guess all I could say is that I would look forward to this. Certainly, the next council could look forward to it. The concept of Vision Zero, because I think some of these issues that have been ongoing historically, like this intersection, it is most likely driver error most of the times, probably all the time, because there are stop signs there. But maybe this Vision Zero, once it gets approved and it gets into being used, it may mitigate some of these intersections that have those problems.
Thank you, Councilor Nero. Councilor Nero spoke to two matters, so we'll start with 710. Does anybody else want to speak to 710? Does anybody want to speak to 711? So we'll start with Councilor Hilsinger, and then I'll go to Councilor Bezalel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't see Mr. Turco, so to whomever is going to take this one. Very exciting to see this kind of language and these kind of ideas coming to our city. There's a lot of really great stuff in here. We've been working on it for so long, and it's great to see that we're harnessing that, and we're realizing that we can do things differently and better and so on, and be more progressive. My question is timelines. How is this? There's no commentary in the report about a timeline. So when do we expect the report to come? When do we expect to be able to start implementing these ideas? Like, how's it gonna follow along, come out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, I can't speak to implementation, but I would anticipate that we'll have a report within 12 months and have an active transportation master plan in place. And then that plan will inform the overall implementation, but I would anticipate the implementation to be quite a long-term piece.
So did I just understand you to say we won't see an actual report for 12 months, like an entire year?
Well, if you read through the report through you, Mr. Mayor, there's a lot of consultation that has to happen here. So I think it's going to take some time to get that plan in place. It's fairly conservative to say. I want to manage the expectation. I think you'll see something within 12 months, but I don't want to suggest 3 to 6 or 9 months.
Okay. I would hope that we could move it along in an efficient way, still get the feedback that we need or whatever, so that we can start implementing some of these ideas as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else in 7-Eleven? Councilor Bezuel.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to probably Mr. Tanazzo. I think this probably falls under micromobility. And this has been a discussion both at people crossing streets in the downtown as well as at the accessibility committee in terms of crossing and having to press the button and them not being automatic. There's been a lot of requests that it should be an automatic, walk or stop. Could you explain to me like why we don't have the automatic lights and is it a cost thing? Because it is definitely a safety thing, especially for some folks that are on mobility devices. They may not have, the range to press the button. Some elderly people, if they're in their walker, don't have that access. And that has been a discussion. Also, I'm very active in the autism community, and teaching an autistic kid to press the button is just about as difficult as teaching them how to tie their shoes. So could you explain the reason why, and is that something that is going to be looked at, especially in terms of access and accessibility for all?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I'm going to pass this to the Director of Engineering.
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezuel. So are you asking if we ever looked at an automated system
Correct.
without having to push the button? So you
Correct.
just you
Yeah, just-
approach and
yeah.
there's a loop of some kind that would trigger it?
Yep. That is correct.
I don't know of any study that we've done to consider that, but we can certainly have a chat with our friends at operations and get back to you if that's acceptable.
Yeah, there have been requests via both downtown Queen Street, and I have talked to Andy Starzomski, as well as at the accessibility committee with people having difficulty in pressing the button or not understanding and things like that. So I think that's a really critical piece, especially in terms of when we take a look at the Queen Bay corridor. We have lots of our elderly folks that aren't as nimble when they're crossing the street. So I think taking a look at crosswalks and timing and all of that sort of thing, I think is really critical for safety.
I can certainly look at some stuff with Andy and get back to you with
Great.
some findings.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that was part of that report and looking at the micromobility and people using devices and scooters and things like that. If that's going to be, if you're looking at the whole approach to where they're going and how they're crossing and what they need. So I think that might be an important piece, and to bring in the accessibility committee, I think would be important as well to consult. Thank you.
Anybody else on 7-Eleven?
No, I don't. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's the Tourism Development Fund applications through you, probably to Mr. Vare or, oh, hello. Through you to Ms. Knopik. Ms. Knopik, I see both events sound great. I see the expected out of town tourism dollars for the first event expected to bring in about $18,000, and they're getting a grant of $5,000 from the development fund. And then the second event is expected to bring in $400,000, and it's getting a grant of $3,500. So I'm wondering, it seems to me that there's a disconnect there, but perhaps you could explain why that is.
Sure, happy to. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. The reason for the difference is the baseball tournament asked for a set amount. That was their deficit that they needed to make it a successful event. They actually qualified for more, but they felt that they didn't need the excess funds for this year.
Okay, well, that's perfect. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out what the report had mentioned, that it's the first time in 30 years that a provincial baseball championship is happening in the Sioux. And I think that's great for the organizers and great for the community. So I just wanted to express my congratulations. Thanks.
Thank you.
No other matters. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 7.1. Streamlining development projects. Just through you, I guess, to the CAO. The request is to allow you the authority to move on these projects. Is this a temporary thing or this be embedded in process going forward? I realize that we're doing it under the circumstances, given the timing of council. But when we make these changes, are they permanent?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, no, this would be temporary, specifically for these projects only.
That's it. I just need a clarification on that.
Anybody else in 7.1? Anything else in the consent agenda, council?
I have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolved that all items listed under date August 29, 2022, agenda item 7 consent agenda be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Carried. Does that bring us to bylaws, man? Or can we do bylaws now?
Fine.
Or should we adjourn? Yeah. So council, what we're going to do is, because we can't start our planning agenda until 5:30, we could adjourn to go into caucus right now to do our caucus agenda to get that dealt with. And then we'll come back here for the planning agenda.
Okay, so a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolved that this council move into closed session to consider an item concerning the proposed disposition of property. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to discuss the same matter without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Carried.
Are we back on? We are broadcasting again. And first we'll go to bylaws. I have a motion by councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth, resolved that all bylaws under item 12 of the agenda under date August 29, 2022 be approved.
All in favor? Opposed, carried.
And that will bring us to planning, agenda 8.7, agenda item 8.7.1, A1022Z 207 Daisy Road. A motion by councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolved that the report of the planner dated August 29, 2022 concerning application A1022Z be received and that council approve this application in the following manner. Rezone the portion of the property that is zoned as single detached residential zone to low density residential zone with the following special exception: permit more than one permitted use on the property. And that the portion of the property that is zoned as single detached residential zone be deemed subject to site plan control as per section 41 of the Planning Act. And that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same. I would just point out that Councillor Shoemaker declared a conflict with respect to this item, and Councillor Hollingsworth has also advised that she has a conflict as the applicant is a relative.
Okay, thank you. Start off, first of all, there's two letters that were emailed to you, included in your package. And if we can start off, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. The subject property, it's the former St. Hubert's schoolyard. So the applicant's looking to or applying to rezone. It's about 6.5 acres behind the school and the newly constructed homes on Daisy Road. Rezone about 6.5 acres to facilitate the construction of about 40 dwelling units, multiple attached units. The recommendation is to approve, and the applicant and his consultant are here to speak to this application. I believe Mr. John McDonald is going to take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Floor is yours.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Thank you to Peter and his staff for the preparation of the planning report. It's very accurate and succinct, and I'm here to take any questions that you may have.
There's no questions right now. We can come back. Councillor Hilsinger, go ahead.
I'm not sure. I don't have a question for Mr. McDonald.
Who do you have a question to?
I have a question for Mr. Tenazzo.
Okay.
Thank you. Going to the concerns of the neighbors, could we speak to that? Is that okay to do that now? How are those concerns going to be addressed? Relevant to the tree buffer and some of the other things that are in the letters that we received?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. So really, when you look at the concerns, traffic and noise were sort of at a very high level, and we're of the opinion, and the engineering departments looked at this, that Daisy Road can certainly handle the traffic that's going to be generated from this development. So we're not seeing any concerns there. The property will be subject to site plan control, so that will require detailed drainage plans, grading. There is a stormwater management pond that is proposed for the site in the sort of southeast corner. The applicant has also indicated that he's going to leave a minimum 10-meter tree buffer along the backyards of the homes that front on McMurray. And I believe in speaking with the applicant today, his sort of comment to me was that he doesn't want to mow more grass than he has to. And really much of what's dictating the design of this development is there's an easement. There's a sanitary and storm sewer that basically bisect the property in half. So that's really impacted the density at which this development can proceed. And what it results in is quite deep backyards behind those, I guess, westernmost townhouses. So I think through site plan control, we're not recommending that all of these concerns be made conditions of the rezoning. I think we'll note these concerns and deal with it at the site plan control phase. And Mr. Acting Mayor, I should also note that there may be some neighbors in attendance.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else?
Further clarification on a tree buffer, like what does that mean in terms of, I know it's 10 meters in depth, but is there certain sizes of trees or certain type, like that are required to create a tree buffer?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, in this case, the tree buffer exists. So my vision and in speaking with the applicant, it would just be to not touch it at all and just let the bush remain as is.
Okay, is it like mature trees or?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, it's a fairly mature bush back there. There are pockets that may be more what you might describe as immature, thick, but it's all pretty thick vegetation. And I think it serves its purpose.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Schnauzman.
Thank you. Any other counselors? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody to speak for or against? And I see there's some people in the audience. Please come to the podium. State your name and your address, please.
My name is Carolyn Chaffee, 136 Batanti Crescent.
Louise Escott, 108 Constellation Place, right next door to the school.
Okay.
Our main concern is.
If you can go to the
Okay, sure,
mic that's
sorry.
lit up.
One of our main concerns is in the back corner where they're building a lot of these townhouses. Those trees have been there for the 30 years that we've been there. Our residents are only going to be 5 meters away from the houses that they're building. We were looking for maybe some sort of a privacy fence just to give ourselves back the privacy that they're going to be taken away when they take away the trees.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Tanoz. Are you aware?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, it's single-story townhouse abutting a single-story townhouse. So we generally, that's not that's not something that we would require of the applicant. There's certainly some fencing and some vegetation that's there now that could potentially be saved and maintained, but I'd leave that up to the applicant from a regulatory or planning standpoint. Because they're two consistent types of development, we generally wouldn't regulate that a tree buffer or fence buffer be put in place in this particular instance.
Mr. McDonald, any comments on this?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, this concern came to light a few hours ago, and I've had a chance to talk with the applicant. From a development standpoint, saleability, it's in Mr. Feldman's best interest to maintain as many trees as possible. So working with him, ensuring proper drainage, that's something that we want to look at, is we do want to keep as many trees as possible. And as we work through the design process and through site plan control, we'll address any privacy issues that may arise.
Thank you. Ma'am, does that address your concern?
Our concern wasn't the tree buffer in the back of it's along the side where our backyards are only going to be 5 meters away from the houses that are there. We already have people coming through. They've cut our fence to cut through to go over to Chambers. And we're worried like there's going to be a roadway right at our parking lot. It's going to be the same thing.
Peter?
Yes, through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, just a couple of things. Based upon the site plan, the townhouses that Mr. Fremlin is proposing would be the side yard that would be abutting your rear yards. And that side yard setback right now is about 5 meters. So that the closest wall to the townhouse would be about 5 meters east of the common lot line. And then I'm guessing, but I would suggest that the rear yards would be another 10 meters or so. So you're probably going to get about a 15-meter separation. Certainly when I spoke with Mr. Fremlin about this today, the one spot where I could potentially see doing a little bit of a privacy fence might be at the end of the roadway, just for lights, albeit again, that is abutting what looks to be a parking lot on your side. So, I think there might be some room here, but there are some pretty ample setbacks, I think, between the two developments that are already in place.
Okay, any other concerns?
No, those were just our major concerns that our members put forward to us to bring in.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from councilors?
I'm just going to make a comment because I'm going to capitalize on every opportunity to say this. You know what, there's been a lot of development in and around Daisy Road, and it's been appropriate and it's been good. I know a couple of people who are living off the new development just to the east. You know, Mr. Fremlin's exercised some good judgment as he's developed properties around the community. I don't doubt that he will this time. I think these school properties that are being redeveloped have been great for neighborhoods and for the people who need the housing. Councillor Scott and I have one in our end of town where the same professionalism and responsibility has been exercised by the person who owns the property. So hopefully that person will develop that property soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I want to echo Councillor Gardner's comments, and I've spoken to the developer. Mr. Fremlin's been in consultation a lot with the neighbors. I know he's making every effort to accommodate the concerns that come forward. And I'm pretty confident that through Mr. Tanasso and Mr. Fremlin, these issues that have been raised here today will be considered properly so that when the development does go through and they begin the final phases, that'll all be taken into account. So I'm confident that it'll be a good build for everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from councilors? Okay, thank you.
Process doing anything for you. Are you affirmative? I'm waiting for Councillor Scott and Councillor Nero. Okay. Councillor Nero? There you go. So that carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you. And good luck to the developers. Work with the neighbors.
Under agenda item 8.7.2, A922 ZOP 130 Wellington Street East, a motion by councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth. Resolved that the report of the planner dated August 29, 2022 concerning official plan and rezoning application 922 ZOP be received and that council postpone this application to September 19, 2022.
Is there city staff speaking on this?
Did you want to give a brief?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. So this is the former, it's now known as the Tech, formerly St. Mary's High School, Lakeway. There was a very minor issue with the notice, and it was legal staff's opinion that we defer the application to September 19th and provide a new notice, which we have done. So this matter, it's recommended that it be deferred to September 19th.
Thank you. Please vote. Everybody's in.
Yep. That carried unanimously. And I have a motion by councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth. Resolved that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Okay, we are live streaming. You can go ahead and start the meeting, Donna.
Okay, will do. Thank you, Emily. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. All right, it is 4:05 p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. And it's my honor to acknowledge with respect that we are in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and known as Bawating. And Bawating is home of the Garden River First Nation, the Batchewana First Nation, and the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. The next item on our agenda is adoption of the minutes of our last meeting, which was on June 9th. Could I have someone to move and someone to second adoption of those minutes, please? Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Mark. Any questions, concerns, additions, deletions to those? Okay, and seeing no changes, all in favor, and those minutes are approved. That would be everyone. Okay, thank you, Fred. I was just about to say, Fred, if you and you were right there. Okay. Anyone with a pecuniary interest declaration for today? Anyone with a conflict on any of the items on our agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to adoption of the agenda. May I have a mover and a seconder for adoption of today's agenda? Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Jamie. Any additions, deletions, or changes to today's agenda? And seeing none, all in favor of approval of today's agenda? That is carried. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. I believe this is item, hold on. 6. And we have a presentation. Welcome, Christy Sayers.